my trip to Europe, Switzerland, and Turkey, and also reading Orhan Pamuk, I want to focus on my experience in Istanbul, actually, which is a town that I visited on my way back from Switzerland. It was a new experience. That's why I want to talk about it. I want to talk about my impressions from Turkey. But more importantly, I want to talk about the fact that how important it is to change, to do things that maybe we're not used to shake it up a bit. I think those are the main topics of this particular episode. We are often doing these travel logs when we travel, and this one was started about a month ago when I went to Europe. And then I kind of stopped. I felt sick and stuff like that. So that's not important. So this is kind of almost exposed because now I'm back in Los Altos. But I still want to talk about it because it's an important part of the hedge fund experience. It's the fact that you shake things up, you do new things, you look at things from different perspectives. And I think visiting Istanbul is a perfect example because it's such a different place from many perspectives that it really makes you think. And it also has certain attributes that are crucial, I think, for let's say, modern times, which is there was an empire once and then the empire disappeared and things like that. Why did it disappear? What happened? What is history, actually? Why is this town so historic? Those are the kinds of questions that went through my mind. For new listeners, just why do we do travel logs? Why do we do book discussions? The purpose of this podcast series is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So why do we talk about traveling? Well, I think looking at the world from different perspectives is not just a pastime of a hedge fund manager. It is part of the business. It's crucial to be able to do that. Or in other words, it's crucial to do that. So if you don't do it, you're missing out on very, very important aspects of the hedge fund business. This is not even on podcast. It's April 22nd, 2023. This is Krim Delco. For the day, the fund is up 1.9%. The market's up 10 basis points. For the year, we are up 32.9%. The market's up 7.7%. We're outperforming by 25.2%. So the travel log started in Switzerland. I visited Switzerland for about 2.5 weeks. I spent 4 days in Davos, which was always a very inspiring, I think, place for me because particularly of Thomas Mann and his writings and the Magic Mountain, which was which I'm not sure it was written there, but it certainly plays there. I took a long walk around the Thomas Mann trail, which is a specific trail in the sort of the hills of Davos. I have to say, this time Davos looked a little bit quiet and almost morbid, and part of that was the fact that the lake was empty, which is a whole other story. The lake of Davos is a so-called Speichersee. That means it's a lake that stores water and is used for, let's say, electricity in particular. So that's something that the Swiss have been doing for almost centuries. And I guess because of high electricity prices, the water was used fully, and hopefully it will refill now after the winter season. But it's just optically a very ugly thing to look at, and it also shows you how mismanaged energy policy can have real implications. The same way when, let's say, you go to Eastern Europe and you see, or you still see, but you definitely saw in the past during the communist times, you saw these ugly towns, these disgusting, dirty industrial towns of Eastern Europe. You can see bad policy sometimes visually, and this is one of the examples. But now let's talk about the real interesting part of the trip, which was my séjour in Istanbul. So I flew back to Istanbul, spent 3 days in Istanbul, on my way back to San Francisco. And Istanbul is a very, interesting city. It's a third world country. Turkey is a third world country in a sense that it's pretty dirty. It smells, let's say the gasoline is bad, so it smells just bad gasoline all over the place. It's a very big city, so it also has that sort of, it reminds me of Sao Paulo, Mexico City, poor countries. have that problem that lots of people go to the big city to look for work because there isn't enough opportunity elsewhere. So there's a lot of that, ugly buildings all over the place. But then when you get to the older town, to the sort of city center, it becomes very interesting, very beautiful, very historic. I stayed in the Ritz-Carlton in Beşiktaş, which is sort of an affluent part of the city. Beautiful views of Bosporus, all things along those lines. And then you can walk from there towards the Blue Mosque and the Hagia Sophia and the Old Town, and that is pretty impressive. I have to say, one of the things that really impressed me was just the vibrancy of the city on the streets, the people out there, the restaurants, the coffee shops, the shops. Lots of junk, lots of, nothing really to buy, but just the amount of people. I was joking, people told me go see the old bazaar, and I felt like this town feels like a big bazaar already, so I don't really have to go to see the old bazaar. So that was really impressive. And as I was walking through the city for, like I said, I was there for 3 days, so I walked a lot. I spent times thinking, walking. I like to do that, and that's just my way to spend time in a city. I don't necessarily go and see monuments, museums, and those type of things. I did see some of it. I went to see the Blue Mosque. I tried to see a museum of history of the Ottoman Empire, but then I couldn't get there. It was too far. So I did some of that, but I think just getting the feel for a city, getting, sort of internalizing the energy of the city, those are the kinds of things that I really like to do when I'm in a place like that. And that's what I did. And I think some of the questions that came up, of course, were like, why did this place evolve the way it evolves? There's a lot of history in Istanbul. It was the center of the East Roman Empire for 1,000 years, and then the Ottomans took it over, and now Turkey, after Kemal Atatürk, secularized Turkey and tried to make a nation state out of it. That's the sort of 100 years past history. So there's a lot of sections of the history. And I think that in itself, of course, is interesting. You have that in other places in Europe also. I think what's really spectacular here is that you have this clash of East and West. I mean, it's literally a clash of East and West, because you have two of the biggest symbols of religious monuments, which is the Hagia Sophia, which is sort of used to be the symbol of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And then you have the Blue Mosque, which is, of course, the symbol of Islam. So you have them next to each other. Unfortunately, now the Hagia Sophia has been turned into a mosque, which is, I would say, a nationalistic move and a wrong move, a politically wrong move, which hopefully will not cause a lot of problems in the region, but I think actually it will. Things like that are usually very sort of powder keggy type of moves, but that's a different conversation. But what I want to talk about is really two big questions, okay? Number one, why was there an Ottoman Empire in the first place, and why did it disappear? What happened there? I mean, if you look at the history, the facts are, I would say, such that you had the East Roman Empire, which kind of came obviously from Rome and conquered the east of what today is Europe. And settled there for various reasons. I would say strategic reasons, Bosporus and all of that. You have water access, you have land access, your connections to all the way up to Russia and things like that. Now, if you look at, let's say, if you read hardcore history, and there's a couple of very interesting episodes there that talk about sort of the conquest of the East, the Persian Wars, and those sort of things. You get a better sense for what was happening there. So you have, let's say, the Greek city-states, and then Alexander the Great, and you have the Persians. So there's been lots of wars going on around there, lots of conquests, because those parts of the world were very early on settled and civilized. You have Mesopotamia, you have the Phoenicians, you have Egypt. So that part of the world has been, I would say, civilized much earlier than the Western part. And therefore, you have a lot more also, modern warfare and more technology, architecture, which is one of the big takeaways. Like when you walk around Istanbul and you see those buildings which were built a long time ago, there has been some really interesting architecture developed in let's say in the East Roman Empire, and then also in the Ottoman Empire. So the question, how did the East Roman Empire happen? Well, they conquered all the tribes and consolidated everything into the East Roman Empire. Then how did the Ottoman Empire happen? That is a question I don't really know. And that's something, I would say it's a blank spot in my education. I wonder why it happened, but more interestingly, more generally, like how do empires arise and how do they collapse? And I think both of those answers can be answered through economics and technology. And this goes back to David Deutsch. Observations are theory, Laud, and this is my theory. This is the way I see the world, and this is how I explain the world. You have a strong economic vector which helps your empire to grow and become strong, and you're more efficient, not just in warfare and let's say things like having a large army, but also you're efficient in developing new technology. So there has to be a certain element of freedom which is more prevalent in your empire than in other empires, which allows for you to conquer others. Now, when I say freedom, it doesn't necessarily mean freedom in our liberal democracy type freedom. It just means there's more iteration. So I could imagine that the Ottoman Empire, or the Ottomans, were probably, they were nomadic tribes or tribes in general that were competing amongst each other and therefore allowed for more iteration than the Byzantine Empire, which was, as the name says, Byzantine in the sense that it was very crude, very organized, very sort of lethargic and sclerotic, and there wasn't much iteration, and therefore the empire collapsed. This is kind of my interpretation. There is a fall of Istanbul or Constantinople. There is a time when that actually happened. So this was an actual battle that eventually was lost, and then the Ottomans took over. How that happened and why it happened in particularly in literally one day, now that's a whole different question that I really don't have a good answer to. But again, it's just interesting to see these types of developments, and of course you can draw the big sort of arch to today, and you can ask yourself, well, who's the big empire today, and who is sclerotic, and who is at the risk of falling towards somebody else who is more dynamic and more iterative? And the obvious answer would be, well, it's the United States. The only argument that I have, which is sort of countering that, is I don't see the iterative sort of new powers that are threatening the United States. We have new powers such as China and Russia, but they're not really iterative. They're actually even more sclerotic than the United States. So as sclerotic as we are still relatively dynamic when it comes to new ideas and iteration and those sort of things. And therefore, I'm not too negative on the United States from that perspective. So this would be my first takeaway from my experience in Istanbul. It is the question, why did the Ottoman Empire happen, and then why did it collapse? That's the sort of leads into the second big point, which is, okay, what happened after the Ottoman Empire, and why do we have what we call Turkey today, and what's going on with Turkey? Those are questions that are more contemporary. I think, why did the Ottoman Empire collapse? I would say the same answer, why it happened, which is economics. The empire must have been bankrupt, collapsed in World War I officially, but empires don't just collapse because of a war. There has to be a prelude, and the prelude was, that's my hunch. Again, I haven't been able to read or learn about these things, but my guess is that it just happened because the empire was sclerotic and bankrupt. And then what came afterwards is Turkey under Kemal Atatürk, which is sort of an attempt to secularize a country and nationalize, make a nation state out of it, which the Ottoman Empire was not. It wasn't a nation state. I draw parallels to the Austrian Empire, which also wasn't a nation state. It was a conglomerate of lots and lots of different states. And then Austria came out of there, which was nationalized. And then, of course, under Hitler and all that, was even nationalized to the extreme. And that didn't go well. I think Atatürk trying to nationalize Turkey has, I would say, succeeded in a sense that there is a national identity today amongst Turks. Has it done well for the country? I would say no. The country is relatively poor and weak. It has a strategic importance, particularly in NATO, which gives it some leverage. But I would say as a country, it's punching way under its belt. If you think about the riches and just the sophistication of Turkey as a country, and you can see that there's lots of Turkish people who are highly educated and have lots of interesting jobs, let's say here in Silicon Valley, and one of the professors that I often work with in Polytech Zurich is Onur Mutlu. He's from Turkey. So there's a lot of very interesting people coming from there. But the country itself, to me, seems to punch way under its belt because it is nationalistic, it is corrupt, and you can feel that in the country. So this is a question, of course, for many other podcast series. Why does a country like Turkey not evolve more? Why does it not have more success? And the answer, I would say, is that there is not enough freedom. It's too nationalistic, too centralized. I started reading Orhan Pamuk, the Nobel Prize-winning novelist from Turkey, and you can see in the book, The Museum of Innocence, there's a line, I think, which summarizes the problems with Turkey, and that is that he says, but by the way, it's a very good book because it really in a very subtle way gives you a nice expression of Turkish society. There's a question, like you in Turkey, you always have to ask yourself, who is the current police chief? And then you will know, let's say, the level of harassment you're going to have to go through in terms of, let's say, in this case, Orhan talks about young people going to brothels and things like that. And it's just a question of the police chief, how tolerant the country will be towards things like that. But what that means to me is that the law and order is very centralized towards human beings that make autonomous decisions. There is not enough checks and balances in the place. And that's, I would say, that's the main reason. It's the peak of the iceberg. There's obviously other problems around the country, which then, sort of accumulate into what Turkey is today. But I think that's one aspect that's very important. So lack of checks and balances, too much authority in bureaucrats. We've seen that during COVID, how bad that can go also on our side here in the West. And I think that is the main reason why Turkey is a problem. And therefore, if as a nation you would want to change that, then this is where I think you have to start tackling the problem. So to summarize my experience on this trip from Europe to Europe, and then back through Turkey, back to California, has been very influenced by my experience in Turkey, particularly Istanbul. And the two big questions I have is, one is, what is the historic significance of Istanbul? Why was there an Ottoman Empire? And then why did it disappear? That's one of the big questions that I sort of was trying to internalize during my 3 days and walking around Istanbul, a very interesting city, a very dynamic city, a very historic city, and those questions just pop up when you're there. And second, also, why is Turkey not more successful in becoming a big part of sort of Western society? And I think the answer is that there's a lack of checks and balances and a lack of a judicial system like we have it in the West. Thank you.